Hello, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. Obviously, you're a teacher looking to get hired, and I'm so happy to supply some tips for you. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, but it will probably be longer, and I apologize. Just a little bit of background about me. I was a teacher for 10 years. I just finished up my last year teaching here in May, and I've moved over to the corporate side. But I served in leadership roles. I've sat on hiring panels, and I've worked with a lot of new teachers, had a student teacher. And so these are some things that I think would catch my eye if I was looking to hire a teacher, especially if they were able to use these topics conversationally. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that I share these with you guys. They may be interesting to you, they may not. I have a podcast where I talk to teachers and I just let them share their story. The podcast is without import or pretense. The whole thing is just to let teachers tell exactly what's going on in their lives at that moment or whatever's on their mind. And so if you want a more real perspective of what it's like for a teacher on a day-to-day basis, you can feel free to hop over to any major podcast platform and search Talking to Teachers. I'd be so happy to have you do that. Thank you so much. Oh man. So I got this from Slides Go. Shout out to them for this whole background. I don't create slideshows, so this will be interesting. But apparently there's some automations in place, and I apologize for those. Just so you know, from the get-go, this is mostly for new teachers. These are some pretty rudimentary topics. And so if you're an experienced teacher, feel free to stick around and add more wisdom in the comments or correct me. And then the other thing is that these are topics over tips. And the reason why is because you're not driving the conversation in an interview. You're being asked the questions. And so I wanted to just give you these topics so that you could help formulate answers in your mind that you can provide to the interviewees that would sound very cohesive and applicable to what it's like actually in a classroom. And on top of that, these topics are really, I think if you understand these 7 topics, then any situation or question you're going to confront, you can answer with these in mind. I really think that it'll help you like as a guide to answering correctly to questions so that you can get hired. And in a teacher shortage year, I'm pretty sure if you got an interview, you got the job. So it's kind of funny to make this. I wouldn't stress it too much, but just in case you want some extra information. Since this is for educators and this is education based, we might as well start off with some accommodations for our differentiated learners. And that is if you get bored quickly, you lose interest quickly. This isn't going to be a highly visual, highly interactive video. Then you can go to the settings wheel on the right hand side of your screen and change the playback speed so the video goes faster. I will try to speak quickly, but if you want to speed up the video, I know I watch pretty much all YouTube videos at 1.75. That's something that you can do. Also, I'm going to try to chapter off this video so that you can just jump to whatever topic you think you want to know about and not have to stress about watching an entire video or trying to click through. Okay, so my thought process behind doing this was to kind of present the idea of being a Goldilocks hire, and that campuses are looking for the perfect fit, which I don't think is really a groundbreaking perception, but this is kind of the way that I looked at it. All of this comes from my own brain. Literally everything I just wrote out here from my own mind. And so this is not the Bible by any means for any term that you hear here, but if you I tried to put things in a way that we just use on a daily basis on a campus so that you can kind of have a conversational understanding of how we use these terms. But definitely go back if you need to verify something and find a more reliable source. So for me, the first thing is that campuses are going to look for a concrete and solidified understanding of what it takes to be an effective educator and staff member on campus. They want to know that you know what's par for the course if they're bringing you onto their campus. For them, their struggle is if they bring you onto their campus and then you're almost shell shocked by the different obstacles that you face. And then especially if a new hire leaves within 2 months, a teacher leaves within 2 months of the school year starting, and then they're scrambling for a long-term sub, it doesn't bode well for them. It doesn't bode well for the district. Also, parents can become a little bit nervous about, hey, what's going on campus? So they want to know that you know what you're facing. However, what's going to stand out between you and an experienced teacher is that you are going to be able to have a malleable disposition. And what I mean by that is that every district, every campus, and every administrator has their own way of doing things. And a lot of times, if you're talking about a teacher like myself or other experienced teachers with years of experience in an interview, sometimes we can come across a little like, and I'm not doing this, and I ain't doing that, and I've already tried this. And so the upper hand that you have here and what you really want to use as a selling point is like, hey, I want to be molded into what you guys do. I'm going to buy into your procedures. I'm going to buy into your perspective of how we meet with our community. And so sometimes schools, they want that because they need you to fill a certain role on their campus. And so that could be a great way to proceed forward. One of the things that I kind of think about is you want to think about a parent hiring a babysitter. And sure, they're not looking for someone that's going to be like, we're going to sit down and we're going to read books quietly in the living room. They're only going to eat vegetables and they will be in bed by 7 p.m. But I think a parent might be more inclined to hire that babysitter over someone who is like, well, I do bring bags of candy with me. We're going to eat lots of snacks. We're going to build a huge tent for it. You know, it might be a little bit messy when you get home. If a kid wants to climb on the roof, I'm not going to stop them. And, you know, I don't force kids to go to bed at a certain time. Well, the problem is that that's kind of the way a lot of new teachers present themselves. And what they say is like, you know, I'm for the students. I'm about the students. I have a passion, and they lean a little too heavy on that. While those are great overarching conversations, and those might be something that you write in a paper about education, the truth is when you're sitting in an interview, you're sitting with people who have to run a campus pragmatically, and they need to know that you're going to have a backbone. You're not going to be a pushover, and they're not going to have to constantly come in and compensate for your lack of ability to set boundaries. So be cautious with over speaking that large language. Also, if you want to show that you're going to be an effective educator on campus, it's going to be about the minute conversations and not kind of the overarching, very high and lofty idealistic reasons that people give. So the other thing that I was going to say quickly was that I got pretty sick in 2012. And I went to the doctor a couple of times, and like a good hypochondriac, I was Googling and reading everything I possibly could. And then I'd go back to my doctor and I'd share something I read. And he was like, yeah, I mean, if you want to try that, let's try that. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, I mean, that's fine. If you want to go that route, we can go that route. And I was floored because I was like, you're the medical professional here. You're supposed to be telling me. And I think he was just like, well, you keep coming to me with all these suggestions. So why am I going to do my job? But I think that that's the way that I kind of look at educators, is that at the end of the day, it's not really like, you know, and I have a passion and I have a desire to, you know, help kids, but that they want to know, you know, how to actually execute your job efficiently when you're in the classroom. So what does that look like on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis? So I'm going to give you some things that I think really effectively communicate that. But like I said, there's more. This is not an exhaustive list. So I'm going to talk about what alignment is, being data-driven, differentiation, collaboration, classroom management, which is the one I think everyone knows, and then RTI, or what we call response to intervention, and then finally how to answer teaching philosophy questions, because you will get some teaching philosophy questions in there. And that's where I think some people can get a little too into the weeds about their greater beliefs for the planet. So starting off with alignment. For me, alignment is the crucial issue of education. I believe that if you focus on alignment and you hone in on it, you're going to make your interviewees feel very comfortable with you, and also make yourself look very trustworthy that you're aware of this. I will use the education language, by the way. Education is buzzword forward. They are language forward. You are going to move a lot faster in education adopting buzzwords than I would say even really, you know, well, the bitter side of me might even say than even really demonstrating how strong you are as an educator. So definitely borrowing the terms and using them correctly is a really good way to sell yourself. So you want to be familiar with state expectations and materials. So what I mean by that is that your state writes what you're supposed to be doing in your classroom based on your content and your grade level. That should be something you know. A lot of this is going to sound remedial from you being a student and getting a degree in education, or maybe you're an alternatively certified teacher and this is kind of where you're getting that basis from. For me, I would say I've had a lot of people that have not been teachers say, but how do you know what to teach? But how do you decide what to teach? And so it's kind of mythical to them. And that's why that picture of the lighthouse, because a lot of times teaching looks like it's a ship passing through the night without reference, and you're kind of deciding what's important, but you're not. You have a guide that is taking you along that way. So interviewees want to know that you know how to go to the state sites and pull the standards and know what you're supposed to be teaching. Everything is tied to a state expectation. So over here on this side, if you see, I have these American soldiers, and that was to remind me to tell you about, I started at a middle school. I'd been a content coordinator for English at the elementary level. I moved to the middle school level, and we were a brand new school. We weren't predicted to score well. And in our first year, our math came in at number 1, reading came in at number 2, and I think science came in at number 2 as well. But our social studies came in last place in the district, and they got 33%. And so my administrator came and said, hey, would you be willing to take over the social studies department? I love social studies. I'd always wanted to do it. So I said yes. And I was talking with a teacher as we were getting ready for the next school year, who was teaching social studies. And she was like, I'm just so disappointed by their scores because we did so many amazing things and had so much fun. She's like, we did this whole lesson where we colored the uniforms of the Revolutionary soldiers, the Hessian soldiers, the British soldiers, you know, the types of Native American groups that were all involved in this historical event. And I was thinking to myself, that has nothing to do with what the state said you're supposed to be teaching in the revolutionary unit. So it's a great example of, they may have effectively taught whatever they chose to teach, but whatever they taught did not align with what the state had set out for them. And that's a big deal. And so as an educator, you want to be able to communicate in an interview. I know that what I'm doing in my classroom isn't of my own volition and isn't of my own perception about what is important, but that I am following what is set out by the state to be taught. So if you see this here, one of the most popular terms in education is the term scaffolding. We use it all the time. Scaffold means taking content and either going up a grade level or going below a grade level. And so there are certain times when you're allowed to do that. Most of the time you cannot change the grade level expectation of work that you're providing for your students. But what the imagery is if this is an 8th grade, or I'm sorry, if this is a senior graduating from high school, the states provide millions of dollars of research to find out what skills are needed for this person to be an effective worker in a competitive marketplace. And then they say these are the skills they have to know at 12th grade. So what do they have to know at 11th grade and 10th grade and 9th grade and so on and so forth all the way down. And I shared this with someone who had recently built a building, and I was talking about this metaphor of scaffolding. And they said, you know, when you build a building, it's interesting because people only come in for their one time period. You have your people that come and do the surveying, and then they're gone. And then the next people come in and lay that official, plumbing, and then they're gone. And then the foundation people come in, and then they're gone. And he's like, most people, they come in, they do their one small part on a job, and then they leave, and they actually never get to see the finished product of the job unless they come back on their own 2 or 3 years later. And that was a really good perception for me as a teacher to understand what our role is. You know, if you're a 4th grade teacher, you're going to go in and you're going to do your job, and you're going to do your job well. And then you're out, and the 5th grade teacher's got to come in and build on what you've done. And hopefully there's enough firm foundation there that teacher can move on. The struggle that schools have, especially with newer teachers, is that they don't understand that perception of education. So they become all encompassing. They want to take a kid from Dr. Seuss to the throes of Herman Melville and, the elite levels of college level English. And so understanding and verbally executing that you understand what the state is expecting you to do, and you know what you're supposed to be doing in the classroom at that grade level, is going to be a great comfort for your administrator, that your classroom will be running effectively. Let me go to the next one here. So the next one is district materials. Not only will the state provide you materials, but the district is going to provide you materials. The most important one here is a pacing guide that tells you all 4th grade classrooms in our district at this time will be teaching this, and we will be testing this date. And so they are the ones that are telling you how you're going to move through the year, and they want to know that you are going to rely on these resources and you're going to follow them. As an administrator, they don't want a district person showing up to their campus and walking into your room and then they're freaked out about, I don't know what they're about to see in your room, especially if you are not where the pacing calendar has allowed you to be. And so emphasizing to an interviewer that you understand that your time is held accountable for, that you have deadlines, and you understand that you are meeting the expectations outside of your classroom from state standards and district materials. It's a great way to really emphasize that you know what you're doing and that they can really trust you in a classroom. All right, the next one here is going to be assessments. You want to know that you understand what assessments are for. So assessments are honing devices. They are the things that are guiding you as you go through it. So one of the things that you want to say, the words you want to emphasize or phrases, is backwards by design. Backwards by design means, hey, I understand that I have to hit a certain place. So by the third week in September, my students have to know this. So if an assessment's not written, your team is going to write an assessment, and then you're going to guide your students towards that assessment. So on that day, they can be proficient at whatever they're testing on. That should guide you backwards to say, what do I have to do to get to that? And that's how you arrange your lessons. Not only that, but this is what aligns your class to the district and state expectations so that the quality of work in your class, or what we call the rigor, actually matches the level that the state is expecting students to be at that grade level. So if you see over here, I have a little bit of a poem catch. I don't own any of these images, obviously, but just want to make sure that I throw that out there. But I worked with someone one year, and they were quite underwhelmed with the state expectations for poetry. And we were 7th grade English, and they were like, no, I'm better than this. And I mean, I've already taught all this stuff. Obviously, they know this. I've already taught all these things. So they went on, I'm going to teach my students extended metaphors and kind of this collegiate, very pedantic view. And I would say this person really did look down their nose at us all year because they were so high and lofty in the way that they were approaching teaching literature. And then we took our state assessment, or not our state assessment, sorry, our grade level assessment on poetry. And that person's scores were through the floor and they were emotional, that's when I believe you become a real teacher. You become a real teacher the day that your students completely fail and you're like, what happened? But what really happened was, this was a person who hadn't aligned their class to what the state expectation was for that student or that group of students. And they weren't doing their one small part on the scaffold. They were trying to do it all. And so in an interview, if you can communicate, I understand that I have a job to do. I understand where to find the expectations that I'm supposed to meet and how to hold myself accountable. Then the interviewer will be relieved to feel like, okay, when this person closes their door to their classroom, we know that there's good things happening and it's not things that are off-guided, and therefore our students are developing what we call gaps, which is missing content in their information because they're being taught other things instead. And so that's a really important thing to try to communicate. Okay, the next thing here is that you want to really communicate you're a data-driven person. Decisions in education are made based off data. And so the idea that somehow you can be flying blind because and I'll tell you how this happens, right? So especially in the age of paper-based tests, this would happen a lot. Or when we have open-ended answers that we actually have to go back and read what the kids wrote and rate it, that can also delay grading. So you take a test, boom, we took the test, we're moving on to the next lesson. And then a week into the next lesson, you finally get around, the guilt gets a hold of you and you're like, dang it, I'm going to grade those tests. And so you grade the test and you realize like 50% of the kids failed the test and you're like, oh my God, but you're already gone. You're already on to the next subject. And so this happens all the time. That is a very standard thing. It will happen to you. It's totally okay. You will be fine. You will correct. But this is where you want to communicate to your interviewer that you know how decisions are made on a campus. So my definition for this is that a data-driven person is someone who plans materials to be assessed in various ways and bases future lessons and activities based on data snapshots. So snapshots, all these fancy words, it just means the day that you took the test and the scores that came back from it. over here, this is a great image. This actually came from like a New York education website, and I wish that I had that written here. But this idea of teacher pay and teacher pay being low, it's not because of their passion or because they do amazing things or because, they give 110%. Why teacher pay should be raised is this right here. This is what a real educator will tell you, because this is what we're doing. Your school's going to have textbooks. They're going to have online systems. They're going to have different tools, YouTube videos and channels for you to watch. And you're pulling all that data in to help make decisions about what you're doing in your class. So that when people say, but why are you going to do a review day instead of following the pacing guide from the district, that you can justify. Why are you going to do this in tutoring? Why are you doing this content? Well, because the data supports that I do this. And so emphasizing that you know how to make judgment calls based on data will go a long way in proving that you are really ready to be in a classroom and make effective decisions. So a couple things to say about that. In education, when I came in, I was always told about the 80% rule. This may not be a universal. I'm a Texas teacher. This may be something that is not everywhere, but it was the idea that when you give an assessment, you're going to look at the percentage that passed. If 80% of your kids passed the test, then that lesson went well. It was strong. It was good. 80% of your kids receive 70% proficiency. And I know that that's where, especially as a new teacher, you can say stuff like, I'm going to have an expectation that 100% of my kids are going to get 100% on a test. Well, in a real pragmatic interview, that's going to make people nervous, especially if you're talking about Title I schools where they know the obstacles that you're going to face and it doesn't sound realistic. If less than 80% of your kids pass, less than 80% of your kids hit that 70% mark, then you're going to say, there were some things wrong with that lesson. That's hard to hear as an educator, because that means that's something you're going to feel like I did wrong. I'm going to promise you, you're doing everything. You're doing it right. You're okay. It's hard to look at data without judgment, but it's the best way to proceed forward for your students. So what you're going to say is, okay, I need to go back and I need to have a review day, because obviously there's some things missing. You'll dig into that test and maybe it's one specific question or two specific questions that they're not grabbing. And so you got to say, okay, these are the two things we're going to focus on our review day. So the reason why I have this crow here is I love the book, Teach Like a Champion. I highly recommend it if you're a brand new teacher. I think it's an eye-opening experience to what to do actually as a teacher. But one of the things he says is teach as the crow flies. In other words, teach the most direct and fastest way to content acquisition. What happens is, especially I keep saying new teachers, but I'm not picking new teachers. I've seen this at all levels. And I did the craziest things. I could tell you, my first year was wild, but they tend to do very interactive lessons that are very cool and Pinterest worthy and could be put on TikTok and make everyone else feel shame. Like, oh, I wish that I could do something half as fun and entertaining and cool. But that does not correlate to the passing rates. You could do that and you can hit that 80% mark and it was a strong lesson and moved on. Sometimes you'll do that and then the kids will, it will not be an effective lesson. And so what he says is, don't take 3 or 4 days on something that you could get done in a day. You could get done in 2 days. You don't want to completely fill up your calendar, because you need to be able to plan in review days. You don't know, well, hopefully you do know somewhat, but you want to be able to say, okay, I got to go back and reteach the whole group. We use the term whole group for this unit or this specific lesson. And so by building in those days, what you're saying is like, okay, I'm going to have to steal from other parts of my pacing guide. And so that's a really good thing to reiterate or to iterate in an interview, that you know when review days should be done and that you kind of have a plan for when they should be done. That 80% is not a hard and fast, by the way. That could be something that you decide. Okay, let's say 80% of your kids do pass the tests, and kudos to you. You're an amazing teacher. Well, then that means, okay, well, what about the 20% that didn't pass? Well, then that means going forward into the future, those kids have to be pulled into a small group. So maybe on day 3 of the next lesson, the kids are going to work in groups on some activities, or they're going to work individually on a project or something. And then those kids that did not pass that 20% are going to come and work with you, and you're going to start digging in to maybe more specifically where they're at, why they didn't pass, and then being able to help them with that. The other word to use is spiral, and that is that, let's say 80% of your kids pass, you're moving on to the next lesson. Well, you can't drop the material from this lesson or they're going to forget it. It's also, if they got 70% on the test, it's okay because they're going to see it 3 or 4 more times, way more than 3 or 4 more times for the remainder of the year. So spiraling is the idea that you know how to wrap in prior lessons into future lessons so that kids get those concrete reminders on data. The next one here. I'm at 24 minutes and I'm trying to talk so fast. Okay, this is a big one. I'm going to treat this very delicately. I would highly suggest that all of this is treated cautiously. It tends to be an explosive and sensitive subject. It's also the area that if you were ever going to get your district sued or get yourself sued or make yourself vulnerable in any way, it would be in this arena, and that's called differentiation. I guarantee you that someone sitting on the interview panel will be a special ed coordinator, a 504 coordinator, and so they definitely going to be listening to how you plan to interact with this. So this is a pretty common image here. If you have a degree in liberal arts, humanities, or any of the social sciences, and right here, this is the idea of equality, and that gives to everyone equally. And then equity is how education approaches differentiation. And it's that you give to those as needed. What you're allowed to give a student in the way of help is done through a planned process. It is not something you're just doing on the fly in your classroom. And so I'll have a lot of new teachers that will just start doing things for students, but they're not following the processed procedure. And so that is something that can lead to a lot of problems. So the idea here is that you're giving supports, we call them supports, or accommodations, to a student that doesn't need it, and therefore you're creating a dependence. Where over here, you're giving to everyone so that they have an equal experience based on the sports provided for them. So like I want to say, I made up literally all the words on these slides here, which means they are not the Bible. I would recommend you go and pull data, or not data, but rather reputable sources if you want more information and based on your state, as I've only had experience in Texas. So the first is the idea of a support teacher. And an inclusion-based model. So you're going to have different students. We call them special populations, and they can be coded into different arenas. These are different types of students, and they will all exist in your classroom. There are 2 types of models. One is called isolation in the elementary level. I know that they sometimes have isolated language classes for students that are learning English, but once they especially get to the secondary level, they tend to be just mixed in with what we call the general population or gen ed student, which is a student that doesn't have any coded identifiers. So in an inclusion model, our learners are all mixed together, some needing supports, some not needing supports, and you can expect to have a support teacher, which will probably be sitting in on your interview, that's going to push into your class, maybe 2 to 3 times a week for certain lessons. And they're supposed to either help the entire class or pull a small group with the students that they need to see mixed in. And so they're going to want to know, how do you work with them? But really, I think if you know how to execute speaking about these different populations effectively, they're going to know that you have some background and understanding. And that's pretty important, especially when it comes to making sure that they hire someone that is going to handle things by the book and not in any way get them in trouble. So let me go to the next one here. The next one is 504. So 504 is where a student has an external obstacle to their learning, an obstacle that is not directly related to their comprehension. Comprehension obstacles will be under the special ed umbrella. And notice I'm using obstacle. You never want to say words that are anyway going to bring too much negativity, too much judgment. But in a 504 comes from the Disability Act. It's actually Chapter 504 of the Disability Act. And it's that you are creating an equal environment for your students. So the most obvious way is to think about a student that has a wheelchair, and then you have a lesson plan where everyone's going to move around the room and they're going to do all sorts of things. And that would not be fair if you didn't plan a way to accommodate a 504 student by saying, we're going to push all the desk out of the way so the wheelchair student can also move around the room. But you might also say, well, the student's going to sit in one place, but I'm going to have the students rotate through them. But you have to have some type of planning in for that student. Now, the difference is that 504 is not always as extrinsic or, extrinsic as a wheelchair or something that's easy to spot. 504s can have anything from ADHD, ADD, anxiety, asthma, allergies. There's a myriad of different 504 plans. So at the beginning of the year, they're going to hand you these plans. And so knowing that, first of all, I'm up day one, I will have all of my special pops organized, which may not be true because you may not get the paperwork on the first day. But in an interview, you're getting all of that stuff and you're going to get it organized and you're going to know everyone's plans. It's important that in an interview, you use the term accommodations when referring to 504 students. They don't receive modifications. When these words first started to become popularized, we would say modifications and accommodations interchangeably. We would get in trouble for that all the time. So just know that if a student has ADHD, they have a proclivity to being distracted because of external stimuli or something else going on. And so there's nothing hindering their ability to comprehend the content. It's the additional layer of ADD that is maybe causing them to be impeded from learning. So an accommodation might be they get up and go stand in the back of the room and wiggle around, or they get to have a fidget spinner at their desk. They get to go take a walk to wake themselves up, or whatever it may be. You want to be able to say that you're going to know how to implement those individualized plans. And this will be pretty important to school districts, because for school districts, for them, it's more about how do we know that when we put you in a class, especially because as a general ed teacher, you're going to be in the midst of this, that you are trustworthy, and that this will be something that they'll feel safe putting you in charge of. So special ed, special education, we can call SPED students. At least in Texas we do. I hope that's not offensive in any way. I'm really trying to be conscientious about my language here. But these are students where the obstacle is not external, like ADHD or asthma or something else that can impede their learning in the classroom. This is where they're having a direct learning obstacle based on their comprehension. By the way, under 504, if I go backwards here, under 504 is dyslexia and dysgraphia. All of those types of things fall under that. Special ed literally has to do with struggling to learn the content. Now, when I talk about scaffolding, you can take the content from the 5th grade level down to the 4th grade level, or from the 4th grade level down to the 3rd grade level. That is called a modification. Modifications are only allowed in this category of student. And so it's important that you can clearly communicate that in an interview so that they know that you know what you're doing when it comes to dealing with special populations. The next one here is going to be what I always called English language learners. That's what they were called most of my career. Recently, they're called EBs, which is emergent bilingual. I know some people in Arizona who teach, and they told me ELD, English language developing, I believe. So there's a myriad of different acronyms. And so you want to know what your state refers to them as. But these are students who the parents have self-identified that their home is not English speaking, or they're not a native English speaker. And so therefore they're going to be tracked. I will tell you the big thing that you will see is a kid who maybe in kindergarten parents identified as this, but now the kid's in 5th grade and their English is proficient. You would have no idea that this was their background. And if you're not paying attention to your plans and you're not realize that this kid is coded like this, you would fail to put these supports in place. And maybe they have that just communicating level, I believe basic interpersonal communication skills, the BICS level, where they're able to speak to everyone freely. But when it comes to the academic side, they do need those supports in place. And you want to make sure that you're giving them the supports that they get based on that. Those are called accommodations once again. Another group that I will tell you, this is not on this level. This is a group that I threw in here because I feel like these are the most common that you're going to confront. There are GT students. There are students that get speech. There are hearing impaired students. So there are other groups of students that are going to be in your class. But the emotionally disturbed students, I feel like this would be a really good interview question, because you will confront students who they, for whatever reason, get triggered, and they can have a quite emotional and sometimes even maybe violent tendency, and how you're going to handle those situations. Their plans tend to include who comes to get them, how they're de-escalated. Your job is to de-escalate until the right person arrives, their case manager, or where they're allowed to go to. Are they allowed to go to the counselors? Are they allowed to go sit in the office? Are they allowed to go to a behavior unit? Because typically, if you have an emotionally or what we call ED kids, you're going to tend to have a behavior unit on campus, and that's why they're there. So the big things is to say, you're going to know the signs of when they're ramping up. You're going to immediately intervene, and you're going to provide them safe ways to de-escalate. Let's step outside of the class together. You know what? Before we move, I want you just to put your head down, and we're just going to breathe together. Or, hey, why don't, it looks like you're having some difficulty. Why don't we go ahead and send you down before this becomes a bigger issue? And so this is a big thing to key in on in an interview. If you can effectively communicate that you know how to deal with these situations, this is kind of the heart of education, in the sense that I would say this is something that is pretty serious, and anyone who can navigate this effectively is going to do a really good job at creating trust between them and the interviewers. Okay, some other things to know. All of these students receive an ARD, and ARD is basically just a yearly plan where they're going to decide what things to update on their plans, what things to change, or they could decide, hey, they don't need anything anymore. For you are going to have to supply data for every kid. They're going to come to you. Sometimes it's awkward because they're going to come to you in September and you're like, I just got the kid 2 weeks ago. I don't really know anything. But you're going to have to supply as much data as possible, which is why you really want to demonstrate, hey, I'm a data-driven person. I will be able to have these plot points in place to give some valuable feedback in ARDs. Kids who are under 504 for ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, allergies, asthma, all of those things, they're going to have a 504 plan. A 504 plan is going to provide accommodations based on their specific need. I've had students that were hearing impaired, and I wore a microphone around my neck when they were in the class. I had a student who had seizures. We had a whole plan in place for what would happen if that student went into a seizure, what the students would do, what the other teachers would do, what I would do. And so those 504 plans vary greatly. IEP plans, this is where you're going to have a case manager who's stepping in and most likely what we call pushing into your class, push in and pull outs. So push in, they come into your class for a lesson. 2 times a week, 3 times a week. So here you're emphasizing, I collaborate well, I work with people, I'm going to know how to, because I plan ahead of time, I'm going to be able to give them the lessons they're going to need to be able to modify, which means what they want to know is the support teacher's not going to walk in your room and then be like, what do you mean the kids are taking a test today? You didn't give me a test ahead of time so that I could fix it for this kid. So they want to know that you're an advanced worker, that you know what you're doing 2 weeks in advance, so that your support teachers, they have to take the work that you're going to give the kids, and then they have to modify it to fit that certain student's IEP. And so if you can say, hey, I work 2 weeks in advance, I'm an excellent planner, and they will not walk into my class and ever be surprised and caught off guard that they didn't get to do their job because of my lack of communication or my lack of planning. For behavior intervention plans, these are the kids that have the ED. These are going to be all about, I know who are my resource people, I know where to go to, but most importantly, I know how to de-escalate. Use the word de-escalate often. De-escalate is a great way to kind of say what the expectation of an educator is in that moment, which is, I'm not going to rouse or drive a kid crazy that's already upset because I'm going to start yelling at them, but that I understand in these very serious moments, use a soft, low voice. If there's a dangerous situation, I'm going to exit other kids from the classroom. I'm going to make sure that I know how to beat these situations. In other words, before they blow up into something major, I'm going to know how to either remove the kid from the classroom calmly and quietly, or to have the kid do something like put their head down and close their eyes and breathe or count while I'm getting the necessary people in place. All of these will be found under a resource system. A resource system is a fancy way for saying website in education. Education loves language. I don't know. It's just it's buzzword forward. But a resource system, fancy way to say where all of these documents are housed. So you're going to be someone who frequents the resource system. You're going to be someone who adds documentation to the resource system, and you're going to be someone who pulls from the resource system constantly, knowing that plans can be updated and things may have been changed. That's pretty much it for differentiation. All right. So this is a quick and fast one. This is an obvious pretty much for anyone going to an interview, but I think that there's ways to talk about being a cultural fit when it comes to a campus and what campuses are looking for. And so I put these under three different things. The first is know the term PLC, 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 PLC. It just means your grade level or your team. If you're in elementary, all fifth grade teachers will be your PLC, or fourth grade teachers, whatever you teach. If you're in secondary, it's going to be, all seventh grade English teachers, all eighth grade science teachers. And so your PLC is the group that you're going to work directly with. You will meet with them once a week to plan together. A professional learning community just means that people come together and they learn from each other. It's a fancy way of saying team. And so they just want to know that, first of all, you are someone who is going to meet. I've worked on teams where we've had teachers that are like, nah, I'm not doing that. Nah, I'm good. And then I've worked on PLCs with people who they are not the most compromising people. And so they don't, hey, we all agree we're going to test on Tuesday. I'm not going to test on Tuesday. I'm going to do it when I want to. Then, or we all agree we're going to teach this next. I'm not going to teach this next. I do this. And so they want to make sure that you're someone who's going to flow with the group in that sense. Another thing, and this is where being a new teacher really will have its benefits, is being an early adopter. And that means, like I said, every district, every campus, every school, administrator, they do things their way. When I was at my old district, I bought in, to what they did, totally drank the Kool-Aid on like, oh, this is how things are done. And then I came to this new district and they did things totally differently. And I was like, it's not supposed to be like this. And you guys are supposed to be doing that. And then I realized, you know what? We're getting the same results. And so all roads lead to Rome, in kind of that kind of sense where you just buy into what the culture of that campus is. If you want to make changes, produce some good scores in the next couple of years. And that will be a great way for you to really demonstrate, hey, I really do want to bring in some things that I think would be more effective. But know their mantras, know their style, know that schools know their community and their parents. So if they say, this is how we do things, it's probably because that is how that community best reacts to that type of communication style or relationship. And so they are looking for someone who's going to jump on with what they do. The last one is simply just stating that, hey, I'm excited to be involved in the winter holiday events. I'm excited to be involved in what you're going to do at the end of the year. I'm going to go to games occasionally. I would like to watch my students play. I would also like to build a relationship with their parents. They're looking for someone that wants to have that community outreach as part of their planning. All right, next is classroom management. And I say that in real estate, the mantra is location, location, location. And so if that is what real estate is, then in education, the idea is procedures, procedures, procedures. And that's what you want to emphasize. I've heard a lot of things about classroom management over the years. And I know that in college, they pretty much emphasize like incentive programs and games and rapport. And all that stuff's great. But if you want to speak in a pragmatic sense in an interview, then what you're giving to that interviewer is, I'm all about procedures, because that is the golden word. So task procedures. I have clearly thought out from when the kids arrive to when the kids leave, everything that they're going to do so that I can create a complete and total flow. In my class, when I was an elementary teacher, I started as an elementary teacher, and everything is very much procedures. And then middle school teachers are actually trained with high school teachers. And so they approach the students, like they're teaching a college course, and it always melts down. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they can't just handle themselves. But even in my middle school classes, I had a one-way. And I would fight it. And I had kids who would fight me on it. I had kids that would refuse to do it. And I would go back and forth with them. But I had a one-way system in place. This protects you because if two kids run into each other and both parents are upset, both parents want a meeting, and then you say, I'm sorry, why were you going this way when you were supposed to go the other way? And so it clearly points out who's in the wrong. Hand signals are a great one. This stops the distraction of a lesson. There's conversations that don't need to be had. They simply raise their hand and you say, no, not right now, or we'll talk about that in a little bit, but not at this moment. And so so task procedures are going to be all about how do they enter your room? How do they get their materials? How do they sit down? How do they go to groups? What groups are they working in? How do they turn materials in? How do they request to redo an assignment? So thinking through every process possible. The other thing here is about the daily structure. Management really is about consistency. The day-to-day should not change. So if you look here at the bottom, I have a bucket system. So you want to have buckets in place. And even though the content may change throughout the year, the times don't change. So the first 10 minutes of class, we read silently. It's what we do. The last 10 minutes of class, the kids work independently on something. You might say, the second 20 minutes of class is a direct teach. This is when we're going to watch a video and then we're going to talk about it. We're going to try it in groups. We're going to, so you're following this whole process. The gradual release method could be the bucket system. First, we're going to do it. I'm going to do an example for them. Then we're going to do it in groups, and then they're going to do it individually. But it's all about that consistency. So even though the content's changing, the consistency of the bucket system is in place, and therefore kids never are lost or confused on what to do. The last one is communication. Parent communication is part of classroom management, and that is that you reach out and you reach out often. And not only that, that you document that you've reached out. That documentation will be word, music, or whatever the phrase is, to the administrator's ears, because sometimes administrators want to do something, but we do have due process. And I have been guilty of the facts where there's a situation blowing up and I'm in the administrator's office and I'm upset. And then my administrator pulls up the kid's file and is like, you haven't written one for all year. And then they go over to the parent documentation side, because your district will have places for you to put this information. And they're like, you haven't even called home all year. And really their hands are tied. They can't jump in and intervene on a situation where due process wasn't handled. And so if you say, I'm going to reach out to parents, I'm going to document, then that makes their job easier, because if there ever is an unfortunate situation, which I know as a new teacher, you think I'll never have these issues, but trust me, you will. And when they need an admin to get involved, they want to know, okay, boom, all of this stuff has been dealt with, and now I can jump in and kind of intervene without a parent saying, this is the first I'm ever hearing of this. So saying that you are going to be heavy on parent communication is going to be a big deal. Okay. All right. Two more, guys. Two more. Dang, 46 minutes. I'm so sorry. I'm really trying to race through this. So RTI, I've kind of Googled back and forth. Some educators know about it, some don't. It's prevalent in Texas. If you're in Texas, you know about it. This is response to intervention and special population. So we talked about 504. We talked about SPED kids or special ed. We talked about, emergent bilinguals or English language learners, all of these different students. And you say, well, how did they become that? How did they get there? That's going to be something schools want you to know, because I'm telling you, this was not something that was overly focused on way back when I was getting my teaching certification, and hopefully now maybe it's more so focused on, but this is what I would say is the crux of knowing that someone's going to be an excellent educator, because they understand how important these processes are. So my personal definition, that is not the Bible, I would say go and definitely find a more credible resource that pertains to your state specifically, but it's a system that tracks students' learning needs and identifies more critical issues. And so as a teacher, you're going to naturally have students who are going to not get it, and you're going to start doing things that give them more attention and more energy, because you're like trying to make them understand it. And what you don't realize you're doing is you are accidentally walking into the RTI process. So right here is like you saw that triangle. If I can go back to that triangle, let me see if I can run back real quick. So here is the tier triangle. Tier 1, this is going to be the most base level of differentiated instruction. Students that are not able to comprehend at this level move up to tier 2, and then those that don't move to tier 3. After tier 3, then students can be provided a referral for testing into a special population. And so that's an important thing to kind of distinguish. So in tiers, once you start differentiating instruction, you're moving a student into tier 1. And this is not something you're going to do by yourself, by the way. This is what's kind of difficult about laying all this out, but you're going to wrap in the administration. There's going to be an administrator that's in charge of this. You're going to wrap them in and say, hey, I'm starting to do more intense work. Response to intervention means a student's not getting it. Their responses are less than proficient. So you're intervening to see if you can fix whatever that is. At tier 1, you're going to start doing some of that scaffolding where you're modifying work and taking it down a grade level. And maybe the issue is they can't multiply, but you know what? They moved states, and that state standards were different than our state standards. So they missed a whole lesson. They were jumped. And so that's why they have a gap where it's just they need to get it filled. Or maybe they moved schools. If you look and for whatever reason, they moved 4 schools in the last 6 months, and you're saying, I just think their instruction level or their comprehension of that content may have been hurt by that. So at tier 1, you're going to start to employ all of these different tactics to get this kid to be able to start meeting grade level expectations with proficiency, which typically means 70%. If a student, you go through those weeks, these are those small groups. So thinking back to that data slide, these are those small groups, and you go through the window of time that you're going to observe this kid, and they do well, then great. You can pull them back out. You realize there is an issue there that just needs to be fixed. But if they don't start doing better, then you're going to do more intensive differentiation, and that's called a tier 2. And at tier 2, you're going to include some other things. You're going to have experts speaking to you about how to best handle this, how to best incorporate better teaching strategies that might work with this kid. After that time period, if that kid still does not improve, then they get moved to a tier 3. At a tier 3, then you're going to have other educators on campus that it is their role, they're specialists. They're going to come in and they're going to try to help you providing support. At the end of this time period, that's when you and the parents and the coordinators and counselors will say, you know what, we've been through this process together. And actually, after looking at it, we don't think that this might be the best path for this student. And so we need to see if maybe they need a plan in place. All right. So what you need is data. So data is the consistent thing. It's a way to hit home in every interview that you're going to have these testing windows. So I've heard 6 weeks. I've heard 45 days. I was Googling this beforehand, and someone said you can't be in the RTI system for more than 60 days. But sometimes RTI starts in March, which is not a good idea because that means that kid went all year without people realizing there was an issue in place. But their RTI just ends at the end of that school year. And so it's important to know that you're going to go back, you're going to tell your interviews, I'm going to run through our RTI process, which I hope is the tracking system for your state, but you'll have to know they will have a tracking system in place. Because sometimes what happens is you run into an issue in November, and then you go to the system and you realize this kid was at a tier 2 in May, and then nothing ever happened. And so that can create a lot of problems. So if an interviewer knows that you know how to access all this data and start day 1 in August or September on this data, then they're going to feel like, okay, this is a person we want to really grab because we know that they're going to be effective. Each data window basically is a certain amount of time. So a kid may sit at tier 1 for 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, then we assess, are they good? They're on grade level. Then we're exiting. Exiting is a pretty popular phrase. They're going back to the gen ed population. After 6 weeks, nope, they're not doing well. Then we're moving them on to tier 2. You're not making these decisions by yourself, by the way. So one of the big things that they're going to want to know is that you know how to wrap in coordinators. Coordinators are important. You will have what they call a 504 coordinator and a special ed coordinator, or you may have one coordinator over special populations. But these people are experts in these fields, and teachers don't have to be, but what they need is for you to loop them in. And so what happens is usually a parent starts to notice a problem, and then they bring it up, and then the coordinator is kind of doing backwards work, and that's where they can get frustrated with teachers. So if they know that you know this process, as soon as you're start being concerned that you're going to start monitoring a kid at tier 1, that's when you loop in the coordinator. So probably around November, and you say, hey, here's something I want to do. Parents will be looped in at that point, by the way. and parents being looped in is very important. What you don't want to do is get to this place where you've talked to this coordinator, you've raised these red flags, and then the parent walks in and they had no idea what's going on. A lot of times administrators, they have a ton of teachers on campus, they have a million situations going on. And so if you can communicate that when they, sometimes they don't know what they're walking into a meeting for. They're walking into a meeting. Hi, I'm the administrator. Thank you so much for coming in. And then they turn it over to you. Here's the teacher. I'm going to let them take it away. And you got to be ready to go. If you have that documentation in place, it helps facilitate these conversations because you can show I've been talking with parents. I've been carrying them along the way because especially in these types of situations, parents can be more sensitive, understandably so. And so knowing that you've been communicating with them. If someone becomes upset, they want to blame you. They want to say, well, you're not doing your job. We've never had this problem before. I've never heard about this before. This is where the admin can say, well, sir, ma'am, I have right here that they spoke to you on this date, this date, this date, and this date. They communicated this score, that score, this score. It kind of helps them really create an understanding with the parent that you are carrying them along the way. So in this document every meeting you have, every decision that you guys have made. And this will be really beneficial for them because these are legal processes that they have to follow. And so they want to know that you know all about it. All right. Last thing that I'll say is you always get a question about what is your teaching philosophy? I was guilty early on of saying all the lofty and idealistic things about making a change in the world, making a difference. But the good answer is effective planning above all else. In the show Veep, there's like a fight between two characters, and one character was like, something is not an exact science. And the other character said, that is literally the opposite definition of what science is. In other words, like concrete is science, like the set process of following something. And so what I say is that learning is a science. It's specific. There are things in place to make you an effective teacher. And so I believe that when it comes to learning, it's not by osmosis. It's not like, hey, let's just expose the kids with a fun video and a dance and a group project and let's move on. We did something entertaining, so we'll call it as good as golden. But so 3 things that I would say. First of all, it's all about planned procedures. I believe that kids learn best in a classroom that has a well-executed plan for how to move from throughout the day. I believe in planned instruction. My construction is aligned with rigor. I'm not just showing up and saying, oh, yeah. Let's all just write a compound sentence. Or I'm not pulling something because it's fun and engaging, but the things that I'm providing in my classroom are first of all, aligned with what I'm supposed to be doing. But second of all, they are specific to the level that that the kids will meet. Right. So, excuse me, in May or April or whenever they are going to have to demonstrate their acquisition of content for that year, their content. Oops, I'm sorry. I'll go down to the planned instruction section. Oops. Oh, no, I messed that up. The planned instruction section, that they will be able to do this effectively because you are providing the correct content to learn. And the last one is planned adjustments. In other words, if you're going to build in a review day because the kids need a review day, then they're good with that. And that it's not just scrambled and a mess. If there's a fire alarm or if, student council planned an event during your testing day, but that you are going to be able to roll with the punches and that you are going to have planned out such a strong and well thought out way of proceeding that you are going to be able to roll with those punches effectively without hurting the content acquisition of your students. And so that would be a great way for an interviewer to hear that you are going to be trustworthy to show up and have something in place, and you're not just making it up daily, which tends to be, unfortunately, what can happen a lot of the time. Now, first of all, there's so much more to this than what is here, and I'm sure anyone who wants to share better ideas of content to know when you're going into an education interview, I'd be happy for them to share it below. And I'm sorry that it took an hour. I was really trying. I really went in thinking this would take 25 minutes, which is like the most accurate educator statement. Like, oh yeah, that test will take 45 minutes, and then like 3 days later, you're like, oh my God, we're still testing. How is this possible? I am by no means a perfect educator. I'm your generic average educator in a classroom. And so what my advice, I had a student teacher and I wrote in her card, everyone is faking it. You're going to feel going into education, you're going to hear someone who's going to be like, oh, in my class, we're doing that and we're done with that. Don't buy into all of those things. Sometimes you're dealing with someone who needs that affirmation, and just know you're doing fine. You will figure it out, have a growth mindset. And really, if you can communicate that you have a good understanding of these topics in education, then an interviewer will feel like, okay, this is someone who knows exactly what they're heading into in the class. And so that they can then trust that you won't implode under all the pressure of what's going on around you. So thank you so much. I hope this is beneficial for you if you've stuck around this whole time or skipped around. Have a wonderful day.